It's Mr. Creighton. We're going to take a few notes, and these will be in the back of your sketchbook just like before. So what we're going to cover today before you draw is just the art elements, so what we use to make art, and then also we'll cover value. So that's going to be the major thing that we're going to move towards before we learn anything new. It's just a reminder of what art elements are and then how we approach value. Just a review of art elements. So from intro to drawing, an art element is the visual components of an artwork. Again, art elements are the visual components of an artwork. It's what an artist uses to make art. So again, that last part is it's what an artist uses to make art. And why is this important to you? Well, the art elements make up every single piece of artwork you will make. So really, you either use some of them or all of them in any piece of art. So even if we're not dealing with value, we're dealing with lines and shapes. If you're not dealing with um, color, then you're dealing with value. So no matter what you're doing, these art elements always show up. And the first art element, of course, is line. And a line is marks made with a pointed tool. So making marks with the pointed tool. And you worked on line drawings last week. If you look at that apple on the far right, your drawings are similar to that, where it's basically made by putting down lines to create the outside shape, lines to create the inside shapes, and also any other interior details to kind of represent the form and the overall shape of that object. So our next term would be shape. So shape is an area clearly separated from its surroundings. So an area clearly separated from its surroundings. So once you have a line and you close that line, you create a shape. There are two types of shapes. You don't need to write these down, but I do want you to be aware of them because it does impact the way we draw things. Geometric shapes, which are basic shapes that you can deal with in math terms, so circles, squares, rectangles, any type of three-dimensional object that can fit inside of a basic shape is geometric. But a lot of times the things that we draw are not basic geometric shapes. So when we start drawing more advanced things, a lot of them will be more organic, and we need to try to find the basic geometric shapes inside of those organic objects to make them easier to draw. So like those shells at the bottom of this image, a lot of them have geometric shapes that you can find in them, but they're not basic geometric shapes, so we have to break them down. All right, so next term is value, and that's what we're going to tackle in our drawing today. Value is the lightness or darkness of a surface, element, or color. Again, value is the lightness or darkness of a surface. So if you look at your own hand, parts are darker as they get further away from the light source. An element, so you can have darker lines, you can have darker shapes, or color. So of course, clearly, you know you can have darker colors, but really the reason why value is so important because value is what makes your drawings feel as lifelike as possible. Having a clear light source and representing that in your drawing is really what makes your drawing feel very lifelike. When you have a limited range of value, drawings look flat, they look very basic and unpolished, unfinished. So having that high range of value is important. Next term is color, which is the visible spectrum of reflected light. So the visible spectrum of reflected light. So having that, it just represents that range, so that rainbow. So really when we draw, we're going to focus on this stuff later in the semester, but there are a lot of colors that will balance each other out. There will be a lot of colors that complement each other, and they all come from that visible spectrum, so that range. All right, so our next term is going to be space. So space is the areas around or between components of an artwork. Space is the areas around or between components of an artwork. And why is this important? Well, space can help make the subject matter, so whatever you're drawing, easy to see. It can also help establish the environment or setting you're trying to create in your drawing, but also space, maximizing that space helps your image feel balanced and complete and more finalized. So you don't typically want your drawing to be too empty unless it's an intentional for whatever you're trying to do, whether that's a theme or whatnot. But space is the areas around or between components of an artwork. All right, now to the value terms. So we covered our elements, so line, shape, color, value, and space. So we're going to focus on our value terms here. So first things first, you can't see value without a light source. A light source is the direction from which a dominant light originates. Again, light source is the direction from which a dominant light originates. So again, wherever that light source is coming from, that determines the value of your object, because of course, as you get further away from that light source, things get darker, and that's where our shadow value comes in. So shadow is the area on an object that receives little or no light, aka the dark areas. Shadow is the area on an object that receives little or no light. Like in the drawing bottom left, you can clearly tell light sources top right. As we get further away, things gradually get darker. So we have a range of grays in between, so a range of midtones. And then as we get to the furthest bottom left, things get the darkest. And one thing I want to make sure you're aware of is typically a lot of times students will draw objects and things flatten out. But again, the higher the contrast, the more authentic it feels. And contrast is the difference in color or value. Contrast is the difference in color. So clearly you can have lighter and darker colors to help create balance and to help create a focal point, but also the difference in value. So why is this important? Value helps drawings feel three-dimensional, like I said earlier. It gives the drawing form. So you can tell the object is 3D when you see light bend or wrap around an object. And that's important. You can tell an object's three-dimensional when it hits one side but not another. So high contrast makes the drawing feel lifelike. If the drawing has low contrast, the drawing can feel flat. And that's what we don't want. If you look at that drawing bottom left, you look at the photograph bottom right, what you'll notice is clearly as we get further away, things get darker, but also right next to the cast shadow, there's a little bit of rim lighting, and that's light that sneaks in. And that's important now as more advanced students that we capture that type of thing because it's going to make your drawing feel a lot more polished and realistic because the contrast is higher. So not only do we have a dark value bottom left, but we have a little bit of light that sneaks in there, and it makes it feel that much more lifelike because a little bit of light does sneak in that area. So it's not just light to medium to dark. There's a little bit of light in there as well. So texture is our last term, and that's going to be important as we start drawing things that are harder to draw, things that are more advanced. Texture is going to be super important because it's going to make those drawings feel more lifelike. So texture is how a surface feels or how a surface appears to feel. Again, texture is how a surface feels or how a surface appears to feel. And why is this important to you? Well, texture helps create the illusion of how something would feel if you were touching it. And that's the thing. So obviously, if a drawing is rough, you're not going to add a bunch of marks and lines. But if a drawing is highly texturized, then we want to make multiple small lines or marks using the side of our pencil to make it feel more rough. And that's important as we try to faithfully represent things. So as we draw, we will always use art elements. So we're going to be using lines and shapes and values for now on and trying to make those values feel as lifelike with high contrast. But then we'll implement textures so we can faithfully capture the objects that we're drawing. And typically the textures will come over the top of the value that you put down. All right, so we're going to move on to our drawing of the day, and that is the terms, that you'll need.